There is a house in Buffalo, New York, that should not exist. Not in a city like this. Not in a decade like this. It is not a mansion in the gilded Newport sense. No turrets of imported European stone. No ballrooms built to dazzle society columnists. No sweeping staircases designed to make servants feel invisible and guests feel like gods. This house is something stranger. Something more deliberate. It is low, horizontal, pressed against the frozen earth as though it grew from it, as though the ground itself exhaled and left this behind. 155 feet wide, only 30 feet high. A silhouette that reads more like a landscape than a building. The Roman brick walls, tan and orange, are raked and shadowed so the facade shimmers like corded silk in the pale winter light. 5.5 feet of red terracotta roof overhangs the walls. Deep, protective, ancient-looking. Inside, art glass catches the grey January sky and fractures it into geometry. Diamonds of amber, green and gold. Beautiful and utterly still. The fires in the four-sided central hearth are cold. The man who paid for every brick, every art glass panel, every bespoke oak bookcase, every custom-designed light fixture, is dead. He died here, in this house, insolvent, broken by the crash of 1929 and 6 years of slow financial ruin that followed him like a shadow he could not outrun. His wife will abandon this house in 2 years' time. The city will acquire it for less than $400 in unpaid taxes. And Frank Lloyd Wright, the genius who designed it, will never repay the fortune he borrowed from this family. How does the greatest house one man ever builds become the instrument of his family's destruction? Who really paid for Frank Lloyd Wright's masterpiece? And at what cost? This is not simply the story of a house. It is the story of a friendship that consumed a fortune, a genius that demanded everything, and a dream that outlived the man who funded it. Before we can understand the ruin, we must understand the vision. And to understand the vision, we must go back to the beginning, to a letter written on a September evening in 1902, and a single, breathless sentence that changed American architecture forever. Buffalo, New York, 1902. A man sits at his desk and opens a letter from his brother in Chicago. He does not know it yet, but this letter will cost him everything. William E. Martin visits Frank Lloyd Wright's Oak Park studio one autumn afternoon in 1902. He goes as a businessman, practical, curious, uncommitted. He leaves as a convert. That evening, he writes to his younger brother Darwin in Buffalo. The letter is not a polite recommendation. It is barely containable enthusiasm filtered through a businessman's vocabulary. Wright, William writes, is one of nature's noblemen. Not a fraud, nor a crank. Highly educated and polished. A straightforward, businesslike man with high ideals. He would be pleased indeed to design your house. One letter, one evening in Chicago. The chain of events that follows will span 3 decades and consume an estimated $300,000, the equivalent of roughly £12 million in today's values. Darwin D. Martin reads the letter carefully. Darwin reads everything carefully. He was not born to money. He was not born to anything that the word privilege might comfortably describe. Born in 1865 in Bookville, New York, a hamlet in upstate New York that even upstate New Yorkers would struggle to place on a map, Darwin lost his mother in childhood and entered the workforce at approximately age 12. His employer was the Larkins Soap Company of Buffalo. His role was door-to-door salesman. His territory was everywhere the company needed him to be. He never returned to formal schooling. What he did instead was educate himself with a discipline that bordered on the obsessive. Shorthand diaries, maintained without interruption for decades. Thousands of meticulously drafted letters, each one precise, each one purposeful. A ledger book intensity applied to every aspect of life: financial, professional, personal. By his early 30s, Darwin Martin had risen to corporate secretary of the Larkin Company, by then one of America's largest mail-order operations, shipping soap and household goods to customers across the continent. He had quietly bankrolled his brother William's Chicago stove polish concern. He had married Isabelle Reedpath in 1889 and started a family, and by 1902, his checkbook was among the largest in Buffalo. Every dollar of it was self-made. This matters, because Darwin Martin was not a man who threw money away. His letters reveal a methodical, almost anxious financial mind, a man who kept precise accounts, who worried about costs, who understood instinctively that wealth is not a condition, but a practice. The tragedy that lies ahead is not born when Darwin Martin reads his brother's letter about Frank Lloyd Wright. He does not want what his neighbours want. He does not want a Newport cottage, a Fifth Avenue chateau, a gilded showpiece built to impress society editors and satisfy the architectural conventions of Delaware Avenue. He wants something new, something American, something that expresses precisely who he is, a man of discipline, productivity, and quiet but absolute ambition. A man who has built everything he has from nothing and who believes, with the quiet conviction of the self-made, that how a man lives is a statement about who he is. He has the resources. He lacks the vocabulary. Frank Lloyd Wright is about to provide that vocabulary. The question of what it will cost, in dollars, in decades, in everything, is a question Darwin Martin is not yet equipped to ask. But he is a careful man, a methodical man. Before he commits to a dream house, he wants proof. He wants to know that this remarkable, eloquent, expensive architect from Oak Park can actually deliver. And so he proposes a test, a smaller house first, for his sister, something he can examine, inhabit in his imagination, hold up to the light before he bets everything on the larger vision. The answer Frank Lloyd Wright delivers will be so extraordinary, so completely unlike anything Darwin Martin has ever seen, that it will make the question of cost feel almost irrelevant. Almost. Chicago, 1903. Frank Lloyd Wright is 36 years old, and he already knows he is a genius. The problem, for everyone around him, is that he is right. 8 years into independent practice in Oak Park, Illinois, Wright is already two things simultaneously: the most original architectural mind in America, and a man constitutionally incapable of managing money, loyalty, or the ordinary expectations of professional life. These two facts are not unrelated. They are, in Wright's case, expressions of the same underlying condition: a total, absolute belief that the normal rules do not apply to him. In February 1901, he had published a manifesto in the Ladies' Home Journal. The title was modest: A Home in a Prairie Town. The argument was not. The American house, Wright declared, must be low, horizontal, unified. It must be a response to the Midwestern landscape, its flatness, its openness, its refusal of the vertical, rather than a transplanted European revivalism dressed up in colonial or Queen Anne costume. The press had begun to call this the Prairie School. Wright accepted the label without enthusiasm. Schools implied followers. Wright had disciples, not colleagues. The central intellectual project, the idea that organizes everything Wright is doing in 1903, is what he calls breaking the box. The traditional house of the era treats rooms as containers. Walls bear load. Rooms are sealed, stacked, compartmentalized. Victorian, Queen Anne, colonial revival, whatever the stylistic costume, the underlying logic is the same. Separate spaces, defined by walls, organized vertically, closed to each other and to the world outside. Wright's counter-argument begins with structure. Push the load-bearing function to clustered masonry piers at the corners, and the walls between them are liberated. They no longer need to hold anything up. They can dissolve. Pull the roof outward on deep cantilevered eaves, projecting 5.5 feet beyond the wall plane, and the building stops ending at its own edges. It bleeds into the landscape. It claims the ground around it. Then replace the wall itself with what Wright calls light screens, continuous bands of leaded art glass. Not individual windows punched through solid masonry like holes in a box, but ribbons of geometric glass that turn the wall into something translucent, something that lets the outside in and the inside out simultaneously. Each panel is not merely decorative, it is structural in meaning, a philosophical argument rendered in iridescent color, some panels containing over 750 individual pieces of jewel-like glass, each one cut and leaded by hand. At the center of all of this, the hearth, four-sided, massive, anchoring every room around it like a gravitational force. This is Wright's symbolic and literal core of domestic life. Not the parlor, not the drawing room, not any of the formal spaces that Victorian convention demanded. The fire, the family gathered around it. Everything else radiates outward from that point, and every element of the house, furniture, light fixtures, art glass, rugs, bookcases, even the piano bench, flows from a single, unified design logic. Nothing is added. Nothing is borrowed from historical precedent. Everything belongs, or it does not belong at all. This is not decoration. This is argument. Architecture as philosophical statement about how Americans should live. Critics at the time were not uniformly persuaded. Some questioned whether Wright's flowing open plans sacrificed privacy for ideology. Some clients found the continuous spaces difficult to furnish in any conventional sense. The houses demanded total commitment to Wright's vision, Wright's furniture, Wright's way of organizing domestic life. Half measures were not available. Darwin Martin, who has spent his entire adult life building things from nothing on the strength of absolute conviction, finds this entirely persuasive. But Darwin is careful. He does not commit to the full estate program without evidence. He asks Wright to design a smaller house first, for his sister Delta and her husband George Barton, on an adjacent lot, a test case, a proof of concept. The Barton house comes in at 4,400 square feet, stucco exterior, prairie cruciform plan, tile roof, brick veneer, completed 1903. It is by any measure a beautiful and disciplined building, and it is the first Wright-designed structure ever built in the city of Buffalo. Darwin visits. He studies every room, every proportion, every band of art glass catching the buffalo light. He approves. Before the Barton house is even finished, Darwin arranges to meet Wright in person for the first time. He travels to Oak Park. He walks through Wright's own home and studio, the low horizontal building on Forest Avenue that Wright has been expanding and reworking since 1889. The building that is, in effect, a live laboratory for every idea he is about to deploy in Buffalo on a much larger scale. Darwin says very little, by his own account. He is a man who listens before he speaks, who observes before he commits. He studies the way light moves through Wright's art glass. He studies the proportions, the way the low ceilings of the entry give way to the taller central spaces, the way the building seems to breathe outward rather than close inward. Then he goes home to Buffalo and writes to his brother William. The letter is brief. "I have seen it. I understand now what you meant." That is all. No negotiation, no conditions, no ceiling on the budget. Darwin D. Martin has made his decision. Now Wright begins drawing what he will later call his opus. a word he means with complete seriousness. Consider what that opus will actually become. The original complex totals nearly 32,000 square feet across 6 structures. The main Martin residence at 14,978 square feet across 2 stories. The Barton House, a long masonry-piered pergola connecting the main house to a glass-ceilinged conservatory, a carriage house originally built with horse stalls and a hayloft, and a gardener's cottage added in 1909. Walter Burley Griffin will landscape the grounds as integral to the architectural design. A semicircular garden chosen for blossoming cycles to ensure blooms throughout every growing season. Inside the main house alone, 8 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a reception room, living room, dining room, library, kitchen and office, all flowing into each other through clusters of freestanding brick piers rather than walls, all differentiated by raised and lowered ceilings with wood beams, all lined with custom-built oak cabinetry designed by Wright himself. The art glass alone, Wright's light screens as he calls them, will comprise 394 individual panels across 16 distinct site-specific patterns, more art glass in more patterns than any other house Wright will ever design. Some of those panels contain over 750 individual pieces of hand-cut iridescent glass. The most famous of them, the Tree of Life window, will become one of the most recognized images in American architectural history. Wright himself will keep the plans of this complex pinned above his drafting board for decades. Not a house, an opus, the full expression of everything he believes architecture can be. Darwin D. Martin is going to pay for every inch of it. The question, the one nobody in the room is asking, is exactly how much every inch is going to cost. Chicago, 1903. Wright pins the Martin House plans above his drafting board. He will keep them there for decades. He already knows what he is making. The question is whether Darwin Martin fully understands what he has just set in motion. By December 1902, before the Barton House is even complete, before a single brick of the main residence has been laid, Darwin Martin has already purchased the land. A double corner lot at Summit Avenue and Jewett Parkway in Buffalo's Parkside district. It is not a modest purchase. It is not a cautious man's hedge. It is a statement of intent from someone who has decided, with the total conviction of the self-made, that if he is going to do this, he is going to do it completely. The neighborhood itself is worth noting. Parkside was not an accidental accumulation of prosperous streets. It was designed, deliberately, carefully, decades earlier, by Frederick Law Olmsted, the same landscape architect who shaped the grounds of Biltmore, who laid out Central Park in New York, who understood that the way a city organizes its land tells you everything about what it values. Olmsted's Parkside is a considered setting. Curving streets, generous lots, the quiet confidence of a neighborhood that knows what it is. Darwin Martin intends to use every inch of his corner of it. Between 1903 and 1905, Frank Lloyd Wright pours his prairie theories into not one building but 6, a complex totaling 29,080 square feet that dwarfs anything he has designed before and establishes, in one concentrated act of architectural ambition, the full vocabulary of what the prairie style can achieve at scale. The main residence anchors everything. 155 feet wide, 88 feet deep, only 30 feet high. Deliberately, almost provocatively horizontal, a building that seems to press itself into the earth rather than rise above it. That reads, from the street, less like a house than like a landscape feature, a geological formation in Roman brick and red terracotta. Inside, it unfolds across 14,978 square feet on 2 stories. 8 bedrooms, 4 bathrooms, a reception room, A library, a living room, a dining room, a kitchen, and an office, all connected by flowing space rather than closed corridors, all anchored by Wright's massive four-sided central hearth. Wright himself calls the whole composition a domestic symphony. The phrase is not immodest, it is accurate. The Barton House sits on the east side of the estate at 118 Summit Avenue, already complete, already occupied by Darwin's sister Delta and her husband George, the first Wright building ever constructed in the city of Buffalo. It is the proof of concept that unlocked everything that follows. The pergola connects the main house to the conservatory, 100 feet of open-air elevated walkway, masonry piered, with 11 framed openings on each side, a structure that is simultaneously a corridor and a piece of landscape architecture, drawing the eye from the entrance of the main house all the way to the conservatory at the north end of the estate. At the conservatory's far end, a full-size plaster cast of the winged victory of Samothrace stands at the terminus of the axis, visible, Wright intends, from the front door of the main house. A vista 300 feet long, framed in brick and glass, anchored by a Greek goddess of victory. This is not a walkway, it is a procession. The carriage house sits directly north of the main residence's porte cochere. Stalls for 2 horses, a hayloft, an automobile bay because Darwin Martin is a modern man and understands that the horse and buggy is already giving way. An enclosed paddock, a chauffeur's apartment above. And in the basement, the boilers that heat the entire estate complex, the hidden mechanical heart of the whole organism. The gardener's cottage is the last building completed, finished in 1909, housing gardener Reuben Polder, who reportedly delivers fresh flowers daily to every principal room in the main house. Every day, without exception, from 1909 until Darwin Martin dies in 1935. And then the landscape itself, shaped in collaboration with Walter Burley Griffin, Wright's office superintendent and studio landscape architect. Griffin is not a minor figure brought in to plant some shrubs. He is one of the most gifted designers of his generation, gifted enough that in 1911 he will win the international competition to design Canberra, the capital city of Australia, beating hundreds of entries from around the world. His semicircular garden surrounding the Martin House veranda is planned around blossoming cycles, chosen so that something is always in bloom throughout every week of the growing season. Now, consider what all of this costs. The main residence alone runs to approximately $175,000, the equivalent of several million pounds in today's values. The full 6-building complex reaches roughly $300,000. For context, the average American worker in 1905 earns between $400 and $500 per year. Darwin Martin's house costs approximately 40 times the annual earnings of the men who built it, for every year they could work in their entire careers. Wright runs no budget. He submits no itemized cost projections, no phased financial plans, no contingency schedules. He designs, he instructs, he expects the bills to be met. Martin's letters reveal he is not entirely blind to the escalation. He writes to Wright on several occasions expressing concern, precise, careful letters from a man who keeps exact accounts and knows when numbers are moving in the wrong direction. Wright's responses are confident, visionary, and occasionally dismissive. The work, Wright implies, speaks for itself. The cost is the cost of getting it right. Martin trusts him. That trust is not always warranted. The price of a masterpiece, it turns out, is that no one adds up the receipts until it is far too late to. From the street, the Darwin D. Martin House does not announce itself as a house. It reads as a landscape, a long, deliberate horizontal bar, low and purposeful, grown from the earth rather than imposed upon it. Wright built the walls from thin, slender, iron-spot Roman brick in tones ranging from tan to burnt orange. The horizontal mortar joints were raked a half-inch deep, the vertical joints left flush. The result, in Wright's own phrase, was a facade that read like corded silk, a directional surface that catches light in ripples rather than planes. Overhead, red terracotta tile roofs overhang the walls by 5.5 feet, casting deep shadows that press the building further into its sight. Beneath those overhangs, the art glass is sheltered, protected, framed, held. The prairie idea is already fully legible before you have stepped through a single door. This building belongs to the horizontal world. It pulls towards the earth. It refuses the sky. A visitor passes beneath a low, compressed ceiling into a darkened entry hall. The passage is deliberately tight. The ceiling presses down. The walls close in. It is, by design, an uncomfortable moment, a held breath. Then, the space explodes. The great cross-axial unit room opens before you, Wright's term for the flowing reception, library, living and dining zone that fills the main floor. This is compression and release, one of the most consequential techniques in Wright's entire career, deployed here with absolute confidence. He will refine it and deploy it in every major building for the rest of his life. The ceiling heights are, by most standards, quite modest. The space feels vast. Wright has not given you square footage. He has given you the sensation of expansion, which is not the same thing at all, and is considerably harder to achieve. The reception room anchors the west end of the main axis. A secondary hearth, flanked by 2 bronze-plated firewood boxes, fabricated by the Winslow Brothers Company of Chicago to Wright's precise design, anchors the space. This room absorbed formal callers on Larkin Company business, cushioning them from the family quarters beyond. It is the house's diplomatic face. The library is pushed forward toward the street on the cross-axis, subtly demarcated not by walls but by pier clusters and a lowered plaster ceiling with exposed oak beams. You know you have entered a different space without ever passing through a door. Built-in oak bookcases wrap the piers themselves, fusing architecture with furniture until neither quite exists independently of the other. The dining room projects toward the rear garden, lit from above by an art glass laylight, one of 17 horizontal plain art glass pieces in the house. Wright's signature tall, spindled high-back chairs surround a long rectangular oak table. The built-in oak buffet integrates directly into the piers. The room does not contain its furniture, it grows it. At the philosophical center of everything sits the living room, organized around a 4-sided central hearth. Not a decorative fireplace set against a wall, but a freestanding masonry island anchoring the cross-axial plan at its geometric heart. Every pier, every window, every line of sight radiates from this fire. The hearth as household altar, the prairie idea at its most literal and its most charged. Beyond, on the north side, the kitchen and service zone, compact, efficient, designed for function, not display. The prairie house serves the family. It does not celebrate servitude. Step through the covered veranda on the east axis, and Wright's ambition reveals its full reach. A 100-foot pergola extends the main axis beyond the house itself. An elevated open-air walkway, 11 framed openings on each side, drawing the eye forward through a rhythm of light and shadow. At its terminus, a glass-walled conservatory. And at the conservatory's far apse, visible in a single 175-foot sightline from the front door of the main house, stands a full-size plaster cast of the winged Victory of Samothrace, cast by P.P. Caproni and Brother of Boston, installed in 1907. She is ancient Greek, the goddess of triumph, headless, wingspread, luminous. At the end of Wright's great axis, she presides over everything. It is a statement of extraordinary architectural confidence. This house is not merely a home for a prosperous family in Buffalo, New York. It is a cultural declaration, an argument in brick and oak and art glass and plaster that American domestic life is capable of something larger than itself. The most famous single element, the one image that has become shorthand for the Martin House in architectural histories, on exhibition posters, in textbooks, is the Tree of Life window. It is not a large panel. It stands approximately 4 feet tall. Its design is geometric, rather a vertical stem of leaded lines branching outward and upward in a pattern that is simultaneously abstract and unmistakably alive. Amber and green and gold against clear glass, the colours of late autumn on the Midwestern prairie. Wright designed it specifically for this house as part of the wisteria pattern series that runs through the dining and living spaces. Today, it is one of the most reproduced images in American architectural history. It appears on mugs and tote bags and exhibition catalogues. It has been borrowed, quoted, homaged, and appropriated by designers who have never been to Buffalo and may not know its name. Darwin Martin paid for it. He paid for the hand-cutting of every one of its individual glass pieces. He paid for the leading, the installation, the frame. He paid, ultimately, with his fortune and his life. The Tree of Life window now belongs to the world. The man who bought it died with nothing. Inside, the house is a masterpiece. Outside, it is a marvel. But the story of who built it, who paid for it, and what it cost them personally, that story is only just beginning. Because alongside the house, Wright was building something else entirely. A relationship of dependency that would shadow both men for the rest of their lives. In 1903, while the Martin House plans are still being drawn, Darwin Martin opens a second door. The Larkin Administration Building is commissioned for 680 Seneca Street in Buffalo, the headquarters of the Larkin Soap Company. At its heart, a 76-foot-tall, skylit courtyard ringed with inscriptions extolling the virtue of labour pours an almost ecclesiastical light from above. The building opens to the public in 1906. It becomes Wright's first celebrated commercial work, and it announces to the American architectural world that something genuinely new has arrived. The design is radical on every level. It is the country's first air-conditioned office building, and among the first fireproof structures built. Installed within it, as part of the architect's plan, is the first metal office furniture made in the United States. Wright designed every aspect of the interior: glass doors, air conditioning, radiant heat, built-in desk furniture, suspended toilet bowls. The building is not a container for work. It is a total working environment conceived from the inside out. The American press takes notice, and not always warmly. The leading architectural publication of the day, the Architectural Record, declared the work no more than a piece of art in the manner of an ocean liner, a locomotive, or a battleship. Wright accepts the comparison as a compliment. His national reputation begins here. And it begins because Darwin Martin pushed the door open. Martin, as the company's secretary, had pushed Larkin to hire Wright for the design of their new headquarters. Between 1902 and 1905, Martin commissions Wright for the Barton House, the Martin House complex, and the Larkin building. Following the Larkin commission, Wright also designs houses for 2 other Larkin Company executives, William R. Heath and Walter V. Davidson. No other single client in Wright's career does as much as quickly for his professional standing. Martin gives Wright scale, ambition, and the resources to build his argument at full size. Wright gives Martin beauty, vision, and, as it will emerge, an almost bottomless capacity for financial imposition. The relationship is symbiotic. It is also dangerously unbalanced. Over the next 20 years, a long-term friendship grows between Wright and Martin, to the extent that the Martins provide financial assistance and other support to Wright as his career unfolds. Martin is not merely a patron in the conventional sense. He is an advocate, a defender, a believer. When contracts stall, Martin smooths the path. He is, in every practical sense, the man who holds Wright's early career together. Wright understands this. He is not ungrateful. His letters to Martin are warm, sometimes brilliant, always persuasive. But gratitude for Wright has its limits. And those limits are about to become visible. Even as the Martin house is being completed, the loans begin. The amounts are not trivial. Darwin Martin later went on record declaring that Wright had not paid back a single dollar of the total $70,000 he lent to the architect. The money flows toward Taliesin, Wright's Wisconsin studio home, toward rebuilding after fires, toward business schemes pursued with great energy and poor results. When the Bank of Wisconsin foreclosed on Taliesin in 1927, it was Martin who conceived a scheme to save it. He formed a company called Frank Lloyd Wright Incorporated to issue stock on Wright's future earnings. Many of Wright's former clients and students purchased stock in Wright to raise $70,000. The company successfully bid on Taliesin for $40,000, returning it to Wright. Martin lends anyway, partly from loyalty, partly from genuine belief in Wright's genius, and partly because Wright is a man of exceptional persuasive power. Wright's defenders have argued that his borrowing was not cynical exploitation, but the natural behavior of a visionary who lived entirely for his art. Whether one accepts this view depends very much on whether one is the man being asked to pay. Martin is always the man being asked to pay. The money flows from Buffalo to Taliesin year after year. Martin never stops believing in Wright, but behind the trust, the ledgers are telling a different story. And when the catastrophe arrives, it will not come from Wright. It will come from Wall Street. The Martin family moves into the completed house in 1907. Darwin, Isabelle, and their children now inhabit rooms designed to an architectural philosophy rather than to conventional domestic convenience. And the difference is felt immediately. The flowing spaces are revolutionary. They are not always easy. Wright's tall, spindle dining chairs are famously uncomfortable. The built-in furniture cannot be rearranged. The rooms open into one another with a freedom that 1907 Buffalo has never seen. And yet, they serve Wright's vision first, the family's habits second. This is the quiet bargain every Wright client makes. You do not merely buy a house, you submit to one. Isabelle Martin, by all accounts, is a practical and resilient woman who genuinely loves the house while accommodating its eccentricities. She fills it with flowers, the gardener attending daily to the main rooms, a small human detail that insists the house is a home, not merely an argument. Darwin keeps the Martin site plan tacked to the wall of his study. He calls the house his privilege. He means it. What the accounts do not always record, and what gives the whole story a particular painful edge, is that Isabelle suffers from scleritis, a progressive inflammatory condition of the eye that causes chronic pain and, over time, significant loss of vision. By the time the family moves into the completed house in 1907, she is already experiencing serious difficulty with her sight. By her later years, she is nearly blind. Consider what this means. The house Darwin builds for his family. The house Wright fills with art glass, with light screens, with 17 horizontal ley lights fracturing the sky into diamonds of amber and gold, is a house whose greatest beauty Isabelle can only partially see. The man who spends $300,000 creating one of the most visually extraordinary domestic spaces in American history builds it, in part, for a woman who is losing the ability to see it. Wright knew. When he later designs Graycliff as a summer house for Isabelle, the central pavilion is constructed almost entirely of glass. Floor-to-ceiling transparency, light flooding in from every direction. Not for the view, though the view of Lake Erie is extraordinary, but because Isabelle needs maximum light to see at all. The most celebrated see-through house Wright ever built before falling water is built, at its heart, for a nearly blind woman. That detail does not appear in most architectural histories. It should. In 1926, now approaching his 60s, Darwin commissions Wright once more. The Graycliff estate is designed by Wright in 1926 and built between 1926 and 1931. It sits high on a bluff at 6,472 Old Lakeshore Road in Darby, New York, approximately 17 miles southwest of downtown Buffalo, with sweeping views of Lake Erie across to Ontario. Construction of the estate began in 1926 as a gift from Darwin to Isabelle upon his retirement from the Larkin Soap Company. The largest building, the main Isabelle R. Martin House, is perhaps most remarkable for its two stone-veneered sections framing a central pavilion-like centre of transparent glass walls, allowing visitors to actually see through the building itself to the lake beyond. This was revolutionary for a 1926 design. Graycliff is one of only 5 of Frank Lloyd Wright's designs built between 1925 and 1935, and the only Wright-designed structure built between Taliesin and Falling Water using stone. That see-through glass pavilion, light pouring through the house to the lake beyond, anticipates the celebrated transparency of Falling Water by a full decade. Darwin commissions Graycliff even as his fortune is beginning to fray. It is an act of extraordinary loyalty, or extraordinary faith, in both Wright and in beauty itself. Through the 1920s, the foundation beneath that faith is quietly shifting. The Larkin Company's mail-order sales peaked in 1920 at $28.6 million, followed by a gradual decline exacerbated by the Great Depression, plummeting to just $2 million by 1939. Beginning in 1918, Larkin had joined the chain store movement, opening grocery chains, department stores, and gasoline stations. But both external factors, the decline of the farm economy and the rise of the supermarket, and internal failures of strategy led to a slow decline after 1920 that accelerated through the Depression decade. Darwin sees the numbers. He writes the reports. As late as 1925, he is filing detailed assessments to John D. Larkin Jr., comparing Larkin's store performance against the new chain giants. He knows the business model that made the Larkin Company a national giant is aging. And he knows, too, that his own wealth is bound to it. He is still paying for Graycliff. He is still lending to Wright. The ledger is thinning. And then, October 1929. On Black Monday, October 28, 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average declined nearly 13%. The decline in stock prices caused bankruptcies and severe macroeconomic difficulties. Contraction of credit, business closures, bank failures, and the collapse of the money supply. For men like Darwin Martin, executives whose personal wealth was tied to a company already in decline, whose private accounts had been quietly depleted by 2 decades of generous lending. The crash does not merely take money, it takes the future. The stock market does not merely fall, it collapses. And in Buffalo, New York, in the house that Frank Lloyd Wright called his Opus, the man who paid for everything sits at his desk and begins to understand what the crash has done to him. The Wall Street crash of October 1929 does not arrive as a single blow. It arrives as a sequence, each morning worse than the last, each report from the brokerage more impossible than the one before. By 1929, Darwin Martin's personal fortune is estimated at a minimum of $2.5 million. It has been built over 30 years, through loyalty to the Larkin Company, through careful investment, through the patient accumulation of a man who started as a teenager selling soap on the streets of New York City. Martin was a millionaire when the great stock market crash occurred. Overnight, he lost almost everything. The Larkin Company's mail-order sales, which had peaked at $28.6 million in 1920, are already in gradual decline, battered by chain stores, by the collapse of the farm economy, by a business model aging faster than its managers can reform it. The crash does not kill the Larkin Company. It simply accelerates what is already dying. By 1941, the company is liquidated. The income that sustained the house, the staff, the gardens, the daily flowers in every room, gone. For the first time in 3 decades, Darwin Martin cannot pay his bills. Darwin Denise Martin is born on October 25th, 1865. He dies on December 12th, 1935, of a stroke at the age of 70. He dies in the house. The 1929 stock market crash and ensuing Great Depression have rendered him insolvent by the time of his death. The man who once held one of the largest checkbooks in Buffalo, who funded the greatest prairie house in America, who lent $70,000 to Frank Lloyd Wright and received not a single dollar back, dies with nothing. Wright, by December 1935, is living at Taliesin and finishing the drawings for Falling Water. He is celebrated. He is famous. He does not repay the debt. He writes to Martin's widow, Isabelle, that he felt as if he had lost one of his closest friends. Wright's supporters note that grief and financial obligation are not the same thing. That a letter of condolence from Frank Lloyd Wright carries its own weight. Whether that weight constitutes adequate return on $70,000 is, as always, a question of perspective. It depends very much on whether you are the one holding the letter or the one holding the ledger. Isabelle Martin, now a widow at 66, carries on alone. She is nearly blind, she is nearly broke, and she is living in a house that requires a staff she can no longer afford, in rooms she can no longer fully see, surrounded by the art glass and oak and built-in furniture that her husband spent everything to acquire. The property taxes on the massive estate, 6 buildings across 1.5 acres in a maintained historic district, are beyond any income she possesses. She petitions the city for relief. The petitions go nowhere. Darwin R. Martin, her son, approaches institutions on her behalf, the city of Buffalo, the university system, anyone who might take the house and preserve it. They all refuse. Too expensive, too complicated, not their problem. For 2 years, Isabelle does what she has always done. She endures. She keeps the house as long as she can. She tends what she can tend. She lives in the rooms her husband built for her, the dining room with its art glass laylight overhead, the living room with its 4-sided hearth, and she waits for a solution that does not come. In 1937, she makes the only decision left to her. She locks the door of the Darwin D. Martin House for the last time and walks away. She is 68 years old. She cannot see well enough to find her way back easily. And the house that Frank Lloyd Wright called a domestic symphony, his opus, his well-nigh perfect composition, stands behind her, silent as she goes. She will live another 8 years. She dies in 1945, never having returned. The gardener Reuben Polder had provided fresh flowers daily for every room in the Martin house, a task he completed until Darwin Martin died in 1935. After that, the flowers stop. One by one, the small rituals that made the house a home are extinguished. Following Martin's death, Isabelle faces mounting financial pressures, exacerbated by the Larkin Company's collapse, leading the family to abandon the estate in 1937 due to inability to pay property taxes. Attempts are made to donate the house to the city. All offers are rejected. Isabelle Redpath Martin dies in 1945. By that point, the house has been vacant for 8 years. It reverts to the city of Buffalo for back taxes in 1946. The windows are broken, the pipes are frozen, the pergola is open to the weather, the gardener is gone, the flowers are gone, the family is gone. What happens to a masterpiece when no one can afford to care for it? What does abandonment do to a building designed to last for centuries? The answer, in Buffalo, is almost unbearable. And it begins with a tax auction and ends with a figure that will make your jaw drop. The house sits empty. Buffalo winters are among the most brutal in the continental United States. Temperatures below freezing for months, lake-effect snow burying the streets, ice forming inside unheated rooms. The building is left vacant, uncared for, and completely open. Windows break, no one repairs them. Rain enters, then snow, then the slow, indifferent work of freeze and thaw. Pipe burst. Water penetrates walls that were built to last centuries. Plaster loosens from lath. Stone cracks along its mortar joints. Vandals come, neighborhood children at first, then others. They enter through the broken windows and set small fires. By the time the house is eventually purchased in 1954, about 3/4 of the house's original 394 art glass pieces are gone, stolen or removed, along with other artworks and furnishings. Today they are found in museums and private collections across the nation. This is worth pausing on. 3/4 of the 394 art glass panels Wright designed specifically for this house. Panels containing up to 750 individual pieces of hand-cut iridescent glass each. Panels that are literally irreplaceable because no one makes glass this way anymore. Panels that were designed as part of a unified visual argument about light and space and the relationship between inside and outside are gone, stolen, removed, sold. Some were taken by neighborhood children who simply broke them out of their frames. Some were removed by dealers who understood their value and moved quickly while no one was watching. Some were taken by Darwin Martin himself, salvaging what he could before the house deteriorated beyond any hope of rescue. They ended up in private collections, in regional museums, in storage facilities whose owners may not have fully understood what they held. The restoration team will spend decades trying to locate them. Some will come back. Most will not. The house you visit today contains a mixture of originals, painstakingly returned from distant collections, and faithful reconstructions made from Wright's original drawings. Which is not always obvious. That ambiguity is itself a kind of wound. A reminder of what 17 years of abandonment costs a building that was designed to be experienced as a whole. There is also considerable damage done to the glass mosaic fireplace, the mouldings, and the finishes. The pergola and conservatory are completely open to the weather. In 1948, the greenhouse adjacent to the gardener's cottage is torn down. A building designed with the intention of lasting centuries is dying in decades from simple neglect. Darwin Martin, Darwin and Isabelle's son, attempts to save what his father built. He approaches the city of Buffalo. He offers to donate the house outright. The city refuses. Too expensive to maintain. In 1952, the city of Buffalo considers demolishing the house entirely to use the site for a future school. The plan is stopped only by neighborhood outcry, concerned not with the loss of an architectural masterpiece, but with the effect on local property values. No institution in America, through the late 1930s and into the 1940s, believes the Martin House is worth the cost of saving it. The city of Buffalo acquires the property at a tax auction in 1946, purchasing it for $394.53 in unpaid back taxes. A house that cost $300,000 to build. Acquired by the city for less than $400. Driving along Jewett Parkway one day, a Buffalo architect named Sebastian J. Torriello becomes interested in the Martin House after seeing a "for sale" sign planted in the yard. He knows what the building is. He knows what it was. By 1954, it is a decrepit eyesore that has been sold for taxes 8 years earlier and is known as a place for adventuresome neighborhood kids. The property is assessed at $22,000, and that is what the Torriello family pays for the house, pergola, conservatory, and garage in April 1954. Mortgages of $35,000 are taken out to begin the process of turning the crumbling edifice into a home. Torriello writes to the aging Wright, who is now 86 years old, still practicing, still formidable. Wright's response is characteristically frosty. He writes, "Hope you treat the Opus according to its merits. When we return to Wisconsin, May 1st, I will look up the plans and send you a set of prints with a bill for the prints." The sprawling main house is divided into a living space for the Torriello family, an office for his architecture business, and 2 other apartments. It is a compromise. It is also, arguably, a rescue. But the compromise has a cost. Torriello sells off the land containing the pergola, carriage house, and conservatory, all of which are raised to build a 20-unit apartment complex in 3 structures. 3 of Wright's 6 buildings, gone. The pergola that carried his 175-foot sightline to the Winged Victory. The conservatory, the carriage house, rubble. In their place, Jewett Gardens. Half the composition, half the opus, erased. Half the masterpiece is gone. 3 buildings, demolished, and the world moves on, or so it seems. Because in the early 1990s, something unexpected begins to stir. A small group of people in Buffalo decide they are not willing to let Frank Lloyd Wright's opus disappear quietly into history. In March 1991, United States Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan arrives unannounced at the Darwin Martin House, following a St. Patrick's Day parade. What he finds stops him cold. He calls the deteriorating estate a ruin and a disgrace. He writes to the Buffalo News, "The concrete is running away like sand. One of the great ornamental urns which distinguishes Wright's work is missing from the front step, but can be found discarded in the backyard." Then he issues a challenge to the community. Save it. "If we keep this building up," Moynihan says, "the time will come when people will get on airplanes to come see it." It is the moment that changes everything. Initial meetings take place in the early 1990s between state representatives and local leaders to create a community-based fundraising campaign. As a result of those conversations, the Martin House Restoration Corporation is formed in 1992 with the mission to raise money to restore the Martin House and operate it as a house museum. The ambition is extraordinary, not merely to conserve what survives, but to rebuild what was destroyed. The pergola, the conservatory, the carriage house. 3 buildings demolished in the 1960s to pay for a new roof. The Restoration Corporation intends to bring them back from nothing, from drawings alone. The total restoration plan carries a budget of $50 million, fundraised from public and private sources. There is one significant obstacle standing between the intention and the ground: the apartment buildings that had been constructed on the original footprint. They must be acquired, then demolished, before a single brick of reconstruction can be laid. The first 2 apartment buildings are demolished in the fall of 2001, clearing the way for the reconstruction of the pergola, conservatory, and carriage house. Archaeologists survey the cleared ground. The original foundations, more or less intact beneath decades of concrete, are documented and confirmed against Wright's surviving drawings. It is a deliberate reversal of history, tearing down the 1960s to make room for 1907. In 2006, the final remaining apartment building is also demolished. The entire footprint, as Wright first drew it, as Darwin Martin first walked it, is restored to open ground. Reconstruction of the pergola, conservatory and carriage house is completed in early 2007, the most ambitious restoration of demolished Wright buildings ever undertaken. The original pergola was demolished in 1962. It is rebuilt between 2004 and 2007. Every dimension confirmed against the Frank Lloyd Wright Foundation archives. Every brick custom-made to match the originals in colour, texture and proportion. For the terracotta roof shingles, a 300-year-old company based in France that makes shingles by hand is sourced, because the original manufacturer no longer produces them that way. This is what faithful reconstruction demands, not merely the will, but the archaeology of forgotten craftsmanship. It is the first time a demolished Frank Lloyd Wright building has ever been rebuilt in a precedent, a statement, a commitment. Some architectural purists question whether reconstruction constitutes authentic preservation or sophisticated replica making. The debate is real and serious, but Wright's original drawings, held in the Foundation archives, precise in every dimension, make this a uniquely defensible case. The building is not imagined. It is re-executed. The most extraordinary single act of restoration is not the pergola. It is not the conservatory. It is the fireplace, the wisteria mosaic, the four-sided central hearth that Wright placed at the geometric heart of the house. A 360-degree work of art consisting of tens of thousands of individual glass tiles depicting wisteria in bloom, had collapsed entirely during the abandonment years. The tiles had shattered, been stolen, scattered. What remained when the restoration team arrived was a structural shell and almost nothing else. The restoration of the wisteria mosaic takes 2 years. It is completed by Botti Studio of Architectural Arts, guided by HHL architects, working from Wright's original drawings and from the fragments that could be recovered. In June 2017, the restored fireplace is displayed to visitors for the first time. It is the last major element of the restoration to be completed. The artist hired to lead the work, a West Coast specialist in gilded architectural tiles named Lundstrom, dies during the project. Someone else finishes what he began. This too is part of the story. The house demands everything of everyone who comes near it. It always has. By the time the full restoration is declared complete, $52 million has been spent, $31 million of it in public funds, led by $24 million from New York State and $4.6 million from Erie County. The house that was acquired by the city of Buffalo for $394.53 in unpaid taxes has been returned to the world for $52 million. The Winged Victory is reinstalled in the conservatory apse. From the front door of the Martin House, the 175-foot sightline is open again. Pergola, conservatory, Nike of Samothrace, wings spread, luminous, presiding. For the first time in 45 years, the Opus is whole. The house is whole again, but wholeness comes with a question. If Darwin Martin could see the Martin House today, restored, celebrated, visited by thousands, what would he think? Would he call it vindication? Would he call it justice? Or would he ask, very quietly, why Frank Lloyd Wright never repaid the money? Wright was unambiguous about what he had built. He called the Martin House a domestic symphony and deemed it a well-nigh perfect composition. He kept the Martin site plan tacked to the wall near his drawing board at Taliesin for the next half-century. For a man not given to public self-doubt, this was the closest thing to a love letter he ever wrote to a building. He was right about the building. The Martin House is where the prairie argument becomes undeniable. In smaller houses, the Ward Willits house, the Robbie house, Wright sketched the theory. At the Martin House, unconstrained by budget and unrestricted by conventional expectation, he built the full argument. 6 buildings, a 175-foot axis, 17 horizontal art glass compositions, a hearth at the geometric center of everything. The result is not merely a beautiful house. It is a philosophical document in brick, glass, and oak, the clearest statement Wright ever made about what American domestic life could be. The Martin House cost Darwin D. Martin everything. Not metaphorically, literally. His fortune, built over 30 years of extraordinary discipline, was consumed by construction costs, running expenses, architects' loans, and the economic catastrophe of 1929. The 1929 stock market crash and ensuing Great Depression rendered him insolvent by the time of his death on December 17, 1935. He died in the very house he built. His wife abandoned it 2 years later. The city acquired it for $394.53 in unpaid taxes. This is not a story of reckless extravagance. Darwin Martin was careful, methodical, conservative by temperament, a self-made man who began as a teenager selling soap on the streets of New York City and built his wealth line by line, transaction by transaction. He was undone by his loyalty to a genius constitutionally incapable of financial reciprocity, and by economic forces that destroyed fortunes far larger than his own. The human cost of beauty, when beauty is pursued at the highest level, is rarely borne by the artist. It is borne by the patron. Wright lived another 24 years after Martin's death. He designed Fallingwater. He designed the Guggenheim. He died celebrated at 91 at Taliesin West. Darwin Martin went on record declaring that Wright had not paid back a single dollar of the $70,000 he lent. The debt died with Martin. Wright did not acknowledge it publicly. The work endures. It is worth noting, not to excuse Wright, but to complicate the picture, that Wright himself was never financially comfortable. The same year Darwin Martin dies insolvent in Buffalo, Wright is living at Taliesin on borrowed time, his debts mountainous, his commissions scarce. The Depression had been as savage to architects as to soap company executives. The difference is that Wright survived it, through the formation of the Taliesin Fellowship, through the extraordinary late-career renaissance that would produce Fallingwater in 1935 and the Guggenheim in 1959. Martin did not survive it. Martin died at the bottom. Wright clawed back to the top. Whether that survival was purchased, in part, with Darwin Martin's $70,000, whether the loans that kept Taliesin standing in the 1920s bought Wright the time he needed to outlast the Depression and reach the years of his greatest fame, is a question no one can answer with certainty. But it is not an unreasonable question to ask. The man who died with nothing may have funded the career that produced everything. The Martin House received National Historic Landmark status in 1986 and is now the flagship property in the New York State Historic Site System. During the early 2020s, the house draws an average of 40,000 visitors annually. In 2019, the American Institute of Architects New York State awarded HHL Architects a Design Award for the 25-year, multi-phase restoration effort. In 2019, UNESCO voted to include the 20th century architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright on the World Heritage List. The Martin House, among the designated sites. Graycliff, the Lake Erie summer house Darwin commissioned as a retirement gift for Isabelle, is separately preserved and open to visitors 17 miles south of Buffalo. The two houses together, City and Summer, Brick and Stone, 1907 and 1931, form one of the most complete records of a patron-architect relationship in American architectural history. Wright never publicly acknowledged the full extent of his financial debt to Martin. He acknowledged Martin's importance, describing him as a client of rare understanding, worthy of his best work. He did not repay the loans. Whether Wright was callous, oblivious, or simply the product of a worldview in which great art existed above ordinary financial obligation, this remains one of the more uncomfortable questions in American architectural history. What is not in question? Without Darwin D. Martin, without his checkbook, his trust, his loyalty, and ultimately his ruin, Frank Lloyd Wright's Prairie Theory might never have been built at full scale. The Opus exists because one man believed in it entirely and paid for that belief with everything he had. The house stands. The man is gone. The debt was never repaid. And yet, standing at the front door of the Martin House, looking down Wright's 175-foot axis to where the Winged Victory presides over the restored conservatory, it is very difficult to call this story a tragedy. It is something more complicated than that. It is the story of what beauty costs and what it is worth. Darwin Martin kept meticulous records, shorthand diaries, thousands of letters, ledger books filled with figures. He documented everything. He believed that careful attention to detail was how a self-made man survived in the world. He was right. That documentation is why we can tell his story today, why we know the dates, the costs, the loans, the losses, the $394.53. There is one final detail in those records worth carrying with you. In the last years of his life, after the crash, after the ruin, after it became clear that the fortune was gone and would not return, Darwin Martin still kept the site plan of his house. Wright's drawing, the one that showed all 6 buildings, the pergola, the conservatory, the access to the Winged Victory. He kept it because he still believed in it, even at the end, even with nothing left. That is not the behavior of a man who regretted his choices. That is the behavior of a man who understood, with the absolute clarity that comes only at the end of things, that some things are worth more than money. He was right about that too. If this story matters to you, if you believe that the human cost behind great architecture deserves to be remembered, subscribe to this channel. Leave a comment below. Which house should we explore next? The Robbie House in Chicago, where Wright refined the prairie argument for a different client. Falling Water in Pennsylvania, where a different patron funded a different miracle? Or somewhere unexpected, a building whose story has never been properly told? These stories deserve to be heard, because behind every great building is a human being who paid for it, in money, in trust, or in something more. Like, subscribe, and we will keep telling these stories together.